You can join us live for our next BookFunnel webinar. Check out the link in the description for more details. We hope to see you there.
So a little bit about what we're going to cover. Let's do an overview. So first of all, we need to know what the benchmarks are. We're talking about an effective newsletter. Well, how do we measure effectiveness? So we're going to talk about those benchmarks first. Some of you might be familiar with these types of benchmarks. There's some generic benchmarks out there for things like open rates, click rates, and unsubscribe rates, that sort of thing. But it is important to know specifically to, right, since most of us are authors, right, to that that industry, what is the standard, if you will, or what's typical? And it's good to know what's typical because that's going to inform you on whether or not your newsletter is effective. So the number one way that we can determine whether our newsletter is effective or not is by those benchmarks, right? What makes a good subject line? We'll be talking about that one in particular. That we're going to spend some time on talking about subject lines, some things you can do to make your subject lines more compelling. What should you put in your newsletter? We're going to talk about that as well. The content that goes in your newsletter, I think, is one of the number one things that makes for an effective newsletter. And then some considerations for mobile users in particular. And then how often should you send your newsletter? These are some of the things we're going to talk about in this context. Again, if you have questions, put those in the Zoom chat, and we will get to those in the Q&A. Kelly and Emma will be in there as well. And they'll also be, if you have questions on like some specific statistics, they'll also be doing research on that. Right? So Kelly and Emma, make sure you heard that, right? So if you have some specific statistics you'd like to get pulled up, they can go and search that stuff up. I have some included in here, but if you have something else that you want to know the stats on, right, they'll be able to help me with that as well. So newsletter benchmarks. This data that we're going to go over is going to be based on the media and publishing industry. Whenever you look up data for newsletter benchmarks, it's important to make sure that you're looking at it by industry because it varies a lot. Some industries will have a higher open rate, but a lower click rate, or vice versa. Some industries are just lower overall. Right? As I was doing my research for this, the supplement industry, they have a very low open rate and a very low click rate. And I don't know if that's just because they email too much, maybe, I don't know. And so people just ignore it, but that's as an example, right? So media and publishing, these are the benchmarks we should be aiming for as authors, typically. Now, you might not be in the media and publishing industry specifically. You might be using BookFunnel and have a newsletter, but maybe your business is actually something different. Maybe you are not an author explicitly. Maybe you're using BookFunnel to deliver some things and so forth, and you have a newsletter, but you're not an author. Totally understandable. These benchmarks might be a little different if you're in a different industry, but right, if you're an author writing fiction, nonfiction, children's fiction, right, whatever it happens to be, right, these benchmarks should apply to you generally. Right? So for starters, the average open rate is about 34%. I think it's like just above 34%. So what this means is that roughly a third of your subscribers are going to open a given email that you send. This doesn't mean that they are going to always, right? It's not going to be that same 1/3 that's always opening, right? But if you send 100 emails, about 34 should actually open the email. A couple things to consider about open rates. They're not always accurate. Typically, it skews to the more actual opens than get tracked. And that's also the case with some of the other metrics like clicks and things like that. Typically, there's a few more opens and a few more clicks that actually happen than get tracked. And that's because your mailing list service is tracking these opens and clicks through means that can actually be blocked by your email service provider in some contexts. So in some cases, right, it might actually be more. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Right? I wouldn't worry too much about how accurate this is. Because in context, this number is going to be the tracked number. In reality, it might be more than 34%, but since this is the number that can get tracked, it's kind of irrelevant, right? Whatever is not getting tracked, whatever opens and clicks aren't actually getting tracked by your mailing list service provider, I wouldn't worry about those, right? So 34%, right? That's the benchmark you should be aiming for, right? With your open rates. So this is going to be a measure of how effective primarily your subject line is, but also the from line, right? What is that email? Who's that email coming from as well? And making sure that it's recognizable when that email comes to their inbox, it should be coming from a name that they recognize. And so that one's pretty simple. Just make sure that you're using the same name, right, for your email marketing, and you're not changing that up, right? Keep that the same and make it clear, right? Maybe put author before your name so they know that it's that author newsletter, right? For example, right? But your open rate, this is the target that you should be aiming for, roughly 34%. Your click rate, the average click rate in media and publishing is about 4%. So that means roughly 4 in 100 emails that get sent will result in a click, right? So you send 100 emails, 34 people open them, 4 people wind up clicking. That's the way to look at it. That's the way to see it. Now, this average click rate can vary a lot based on the content that you include. And often the click rate is what people are chasing, right? The open rate is great. It's nice, right? But the click rate is often what people are chasing because you're going to have them click and go somewhere else and do something. That's usually what's tied to your call to action in your newsletter. So if we're talking about the effectiveness of your newsletter, right? What is your click rate? Right? What percentage of people are clicking when they open an email? That's going to then trickle down to whatever results you're wanting to happen on the back end. Are you wanting them to buy a book? Are you wanting them to claim an ARC copy or join your advanced reader team? Or what are you wanting them to do? Right? There's so many things we could list, but the click is necessary in almost all cases, right? You're going to want them most of the time to click. Right? And 4% might not sound like much, right? You might be thinking, well, okay, you have 1,000 subscribers, maybe, right? A modest size list, right? That you might have less than that. Some might have more than that, whatever it happens to be. But it's not 10,000 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. You send an email to all of your subscribers, and you can expect about 340 people to open it, about 40 clicks to come from that. So you can start to see how you can do the math, right? Now, what this means, though, is that there's going to be 2/3 who didn't open that individual email. But if you send an email later, maybe the next week, and still include that same call to action, some of the folks who didn't open the last one are going to open this one, and they'll have an opportunity to click on it. So don't think of things as one and done when you put them into your newsletter. You want to be consistent, and there are some calls to action that you're going to want to include on an ongoing basis without them becoming too stale, right? Because it's going to take time for all of your subscribers to get exposed to that and see that and eventually click on it, is the idea, right? So this 4%, that doesn't mean that they're just ignoring it. They opened the email and they just ignored it and whatever. That might be the case sometimes, right? Maybe, right, in that moment, they didn't want to click. But if you see that you're not getting very many clicks on something, and so you give up on it, really all you probably needed to do was share that with them again multiple times in order to get enough exposure to your subscribers that they will then actually click and follow through on that call to action, right? The average unsubscribe rate is 0.09%, and unsubscribe rates are complicated. When you do, there's actually a formula to calculate this percentage. If you really wanted to know, the unsubscribe rate is the number of unsubscribers divided by the number of emails sent multiplied by 100. So I'm sure everybody can do that math in their heads, right? But that means that roughly one unsubscribe per 1,000 emails sent is roughly around where you're looking. It might be more or less. Might also be more or less depending on where your subscribers came from, your sending frequency, all sorts of things. And this is the one number here that I think tells us less about the effectiveness of your newsletter. The open rate and the click rate are going to tell you more about how effective your newsletter is. And sometimes you actually wouldn't mind having a slightly higher unsubscribe rate. Sometimes that might not be as big of a deal to you, in particular, if that's just the way you manage your newsletter. I wouldn't worry as much about this number as I would the other two. Your open rate and your click rate matter more, in my opinion, than the unsubscribe rate, as long as it's not an obscene number, right? As long as we're not talking about like a 1% or something like that, or even like a 0.5, then there's probably something going on. There's some issues going on, right? But if it's a little bit higher than 0.09, I wouldn't be too worried. I wouldn't be too worried. Again, it depends on the source. Did you get most of your subscribers through BookFunnel promos? Well, a lot of those readers, right? If we're being honest here, a lot of those readers will show up to a BookFunnel promo, and some of them will claim every book in that promo. And that means they're joining all of those authors' lists. And maybe that they're just doing that to get free books. There are going to be some of those readers, right? It's a reality of BookFunnel promos. If you do a lot of BookFunnel promos, your unsubscribe rate might be a little bit higher, right? But if you know that and you know why that's why your unsubscribe rate is a little bit higher, that number can make more sense and you're not going to be as worried about it. So you might err from any of these benchmarks in one direction or the other. Your open rate might be a little bit lower, but is your click rate higher? Well, then I wouldn't be too worried about it, right? It would be worse if your open rate were higher, but your click rate was really low, right? That would be bad, right? And if you've got a really great open rate and an above average click rate, but your unsubscribe rate is, even twice of 0.09, it's 0.18. I don't know that I'd be worried about that, especially if you have 8% or higher click rate, right? You're getting people to engage. I wouldn't be as worried about a higher unsubscribe rate. So you have to understand these benchmarks in context too. But if you're just looking for some simple numbers that you can take a screenshot of right now, and remember, these are the numbers to go off of. And technically, there's some decimal points at the end of the 34 and the 4, but it looks neater without them, so I didn't include those. So it is like slightly above 4%, slightly above 34%. Right, for media and publishing for that industry. Now, we talked about open rates, and your subject line is really the key to boosting your open rate. This is what your subscribers are going to see when they get that notification on their phone or in their email inbox, and that's going to be what gets them to click on it and open it, right? So your subject line should be compelling and descriptive, but don't overthink it. Right? Don't overthink your subject line and overcomplicate it. What is it that they're getting when they open this email? That's the question that you might want to ask yourself, and then base your subject line on that. Does it align with their needs and wants, right, as well? If you're telling them about something that they're not really interested in the subject line, they might not open it, right? However, with consistency, if you're doing things the same way, they know what to expect from you. That's key as well. But what are they getting? Is it some new bonus content? Right. I think there's going to be people very interested in that. Right. Do you have a new release? Right. What is it that is being included? What is it that they're going to want to check out in that email? Right. And sometimes this also could be something maybe funny, right? If you include some more, personal content in your newsletter, right? This could be, you could say something funny in your subject line. I'm not the expert at this because I don't personally use that method. I have a different method myself, but I know some authors who do that with great effect by having a funny subject line or something, like you won't believe what happened when I went to the zoo. Right. Okay. That's too long of a subject line, in all honesty, which actually brings me to the next point. You want to keep it short and simple too. Right. So in that example, again, you won't believe what happened when I went to the zoo. Maybe that one's a little too long. You'd want to kind of shave it down, make it a little bit shorter. Keep in mind that long subject lines are going to get cut off. Now, you can actually use this to your benefit sometimes. If you have like the last word or the last couple of words cut off, if your subject line is long enough, if that first part of the subject line is enough where they want to see what the full subject line is and they'll click on it. So take that with a grain of salt. Just because the subject line gets cut off doesn't mean that your subject line can't be a little bit longer, but it shouldn't be horrendously long, right? It should be a short phrase. Sometimes the shorter the better, depending on the delivery. And things you want to avoid: excessive punctuation. We don't need all the exclamation marks, right? Excessive amounts of emojis, right? Also something to avoid, right? Using an emoji in a subject line occasionally can help get some extra attention. And maybe you use a specific emoji in your subject lines. I've seen some authors who do that as well. They always use a certain emoji at the beginning of their subject line. Something like that can help readers identify your emails in their inbox. So that's a very useful thing to use sometimes, but don't be excessive about it, right? Keep things short and simple. Another few things to avoid, if you can, avoid using phrases like buy and anything with like a dollar sign or a currency symbol, or even sometimes the word free. Those can sometimes get emails filtered into spam. So if you're looking and your open rates are below that average, they're below 34%, that's another thing to consider too, right? The first place I would look if your open rate is below 34% is, what's your subject line, right? Is it a good subject line? A/B testing can help here. You can A/B test different subject lines, but once you find a groove and once you find, how to write a compelling subject line, I think you'll get the hang of it, right? You kind of have to put yourself in their shoes. And the other thing to do too is sign up for other authors' newsletters. See what subject lines they use. Don't copy them verbatim, but see their style. And then, informed by that, create your own style. Right? One thing that I do, for example, when I share one of my weekly emails that goes out to my subscribers, I use slogans from well-known and famous slogans. And then I replace one of the words in that slogan with a relevant term that I use all the time. So that's like a style that I started using, right? And I stick to that style. So when they see that in their inbox, they know it's from me, and they're more likely to open it, right? Whereas if I, sent kind of a random subject line every now and then, it might not get opened as much. So, and that's important to consider. Be consistent. And so we're talking about style, right? Be consistent, but don't be afraid to mix it up every now and then to keep things fresh. If it's getting stale, try something new, right? Try a one-word subject line, right? See how it goes. If you pick the right word, hey, maybe it'll work. Probably not something you'd want to do all the time, but occasionally it could work. Try changing things up like that, right? And to make individual emails a little bit more successful, but don't rely on gimmicks like that all the time, right? The clickbait, right, style a gimmick where you're overselling what's included. No, again, keep it simple. It should be compelling, right? What are they getting out of it? Right? It should be something that they want to get. out of it, something of value, and it should be descriptive of what's actually included in that email, right? So if your open rate is struggling, right, or it's very low, right, consider that. I've seen some authors who the subject line of their emails is always the same. For example, this is a note on consistency. For them, that actually can work if you're always using the same subject line, right? If you use the same subject line because the content that you're including in your newsletter is usually fairly similar, like things are updating and changing, but it's fairly similar, that's one thing that you could do, for example, right? And it makes it very, in that case, it makes it very noticeable. But if you're going to do that, you're going to want to be consistent with it. So it's up to you exactly how you choose to go down that path, right? But be consistent, keep it short, keep it simple, and be descriptive. Now, what should go in your newsletter? This is a good question. This is a question that we get a lot. What should I put in there? And maybe this is where you're struggling a little bit. What content goes in there? This is important. This also influences your open rate. If somebody has opened your newsletter before and they got something really cool, they're more likely to open your newsletter the next time. They got some value out of it the first time, they're more likely to come back and open again. So we do want to consider, right, what goes in your newsletter. This does influence your open rate. It also has a strong influence on your click rate, though, too. So we want to know that. So something relationship building can be included. Sometimes this is brief, sometimes it's going to be long. You might be writing them a Christmas card or just telling them, hey, this is what I did last weekend. That can boost retention. I recommend considering a blog format if you're doing something personal, and for reasons I'm going to touch on here in a little bit, because it's something that you can link to externally. I've seen some newsletters that authors have written where it is just text, like paragraphs and paragraphs of text. Some readers love that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing any shade at anybody, right? Some readers love that and they're going to read it. What's going to happen, though, is you're going to have a lower click rate. The more text you have, the lower the click rate is going to be. And so if we're looking to determine the effectiveness of your newsletter, what I recommend you do is maybe have a preview of that blog post, if you're doing it in that format, and then a link to where they can go and read the whole thing. So you're not having to cram all of that into your newsletter. Unless you want to, in which case, commit to that, but understand that that typically is going to lead to a lower click rate. And we'll talk about in a little bit here some of the reasons why it leads to a lower click rate. And it's not just because it's text, right? But some readers are going to open up your newsletter and they're going to see text. And even though they're readers, they might not want to sit there and read it. That's something you have to keep in mind. They might engage better if you give them a little snippet and then a link to go read it elsewhere. And then you're also giving them a way to kind of save that for later too, as well. But whatever it happens to look like, something relationship building is worth including. This is something I myself am terrible at, right? So this is something I know I need to improve on myself, right? However, it's also optional. If you don't want to talk about yourself in your newsletter, you don't have to. Relationship building can be different. It doesn't have to be, this is what I did last weekend, and this is what my dog ate, and this is what my kids are doing, and this is what happened at my day job. And you don't have to do like the day in the life type of thing. You could just like give them an update on like, oh, this is how the next book is going, and I'm doing this, but it's from that first person, like you're telling it to them. It could be about that, but it's still a way for you to connect directly with them. So it doesn't have to be the Christmas card style, right, stuff where you're telling them about what's going on in your life. If you don't want to share that information, you can talk about what's going on in your writer life, or maybe some things you thought about. I've seen some authors too who will sometimes pull in I'm in science fiction and fantasy myself, so I follow some other science fiction authors. And if NASA is doing something cool, right, they'll pull in and talk about something that is interesting in the field of science, which is relevant to science fiction, right? But you want to be careful, right, about what you include there. If it's too irrelevant or it's too far on the edge of relevancy, then you lose some people. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. Right. So just know not everything is going to be a home run either. Keep that in mind. Right. Calls to action. This is where you get your clicks. This is where you get your clicks. What do you want them to do when they get the email? Most of the emails, the newsletters you send should have some kind of goal in mind. Do you want them to read a blog post? Well, okay, you're going to want to have a call to action for them to go and read that blog post. Do you have an arc you want them to sign up for? Right. Well, there should be a link, a call to action to send them to go sign up for that arc or to join your advanced reader team, right? Or your beta reader team, whatever it looks like. Right. And remember, right? You do have books you want to sell, I'm assuming. Sell your books. You'll want to sell your books in your newsletter too. Right? So make sure that you are including those in there as well. You should have kind of a mix of different things most of the time. Maybe 3 different calls to action. I would say probably no more than 5, right? But about 3 to 5 is a good happy range, right? Because some of them might be interested in reading that blog post, but they're not interested in signing up for an arc. And some of them might want the arc, but don't want the blog post. And some of them want your new release, but they don't want either of the other two. And so if you give a little bit of variety, there's something there for everybody. And this will increase your click rate and all that. That's all good. It should also be clear though, right? And I'm going to show here in a little bit how you make that clear. But generally speaking, to go back to what I mentioned earlier about text, text is not the most clear way to communicate a call to action, oftentimes. You want to pair a few things together, and we're going to talk about that here in just a bit. We're going to make a sandwich, folks. You'll see what I mean here in just a minute. You want to have something to say and something to offer. So, like we talked about, blog posts, your own free books, reader magnets, bonus content, behind the scenes content, cross promotional content. That's things like promos and swaps and so forth. Have something to offer them. And typically, try to have something new to offer them. Maybe you're going to keep a link to your recent release in your newsletter for like the foreseeable future. It's going to be in there for the next 3 months until your next release, right? Or whatever your release schedule looks like. Maybe it's longer, maybe it's shorter, right? Whatever it happens to be. Maybe that's going to be a pretty much standard. It's going to stay there. But maybe you have a survey that you want to include. And that's something kind of fresh and new. Maybe you have some new promos and swaps that you're putting into your newsletter. New stuff should be in there, right? I wouldn't send an email to your newsletter and then turn around and send the same email 2 days later with nothing new, right? If you have nothing new to offer them, it's probably better to wait until you do have something new to offer them. And so this is where having different things to say, like, you might not have new bonus content coming out every month, but maybe you can have a blog post that you can write every month. And that's something that you could share, or just some behind the scenes content. This is what's going on with the editing I'm doing on book 3, right? As an example, right? What's something that you can offer them? What's the value they're getting out of it, right? I've seen some newsletters. I never, by the way, I never name names, folks. I won't do that. But I've seen some newsletters from authors where it's literally every email is just a wall of all their releases with links to go buy them on Amazon. And then some stuff at the bottom. But it's always the same. Every email is just links to all of their books. That's just linking you there to go buy their books. That's what every email is. And I imagine, it's not my newsletter, I'm not managing it, but I imagine for readers, they might not open that as often after they open it the first few times and they see it's all the same and it's just links to go buy their books. Well, what are they going to do if they've already bought your books? What are they going to do then? What are you offering your readers who have already purchased everything that you've put out there, right? What's in there for them? So have something to say, have something to offer, a little bit for everybody. And I've been talking about text and graphics uh, already. I tend to do this where I overtalk my talking points and then I get to the last one. And I've already said this already, but a solid wall of text can easily be ignored, especially considering the context that most of your subscribers are going to be in when they open your emails. We'll talk about that in a moment. A large heading with a descriptive subheading, a compelling image, and a button is the perfect sandwich for presenting content to someone. It's a mix of text and graphics. Not too much of one, not too much of the other, but mixing those together. Right? So what does that look like? Right? So this slide is called Considerations for Mobile because most of your subscribers are going to be on a mobile device when they open your emails. They're not going to be sitting at their computer. They're going to be on their phone and they're going to open your email. And this is the content sandwich I was talking about. We have a heading, large text, smaller text with a descriptive subheading. We have an image that's related to the call to action, and that is linked here in a button. Both of these are going to link them somewhere outside of the email, right? Is this a promo you're sharing, for example, or a swap? It's the cover of the other author's book, maybe a brief heading, a subheading, and a call to action. Both of those link to that. Is this your new release? Same thing. Is this your ARC team? Same thing. And this links them to a place where they can go and sign up. Right? In some cases, you might even be able to put like an opt-in form embedded in the email. Perhaps you could do fancy things like that too. But generally, this is the content sandwich that I recommend you create. And then you would just have 3 to 5 of these in your newsletter. And they link them to somewhere. For me, usually, and I'm a little I don't know that I'd call myself an overachiever, folks. I don't like to toot my own horn, but for me, always my recent release is in there. My bonus content that goes to a BookFunnel bundle page where all the bonus content can be found. So I'm pointing them to one place to get like 3 or 4 books that are free. That's most of the time, those are in every email that gets sent. A link to a promos page. I have a page where all of my promos are. That's something I've talked about a few times. We talked about this a little bit in our webinar last week when we were talking about swaps. And so that's there. It's one link that they click and then they can go to another page and see all the promos. It's all streamlined. And then a blog post, a recent blog post usually, or some new bonus content that I've recently released, or I have a new release coming up. So I was putting out a call to action for ARCs. Right? So for me, it's about 4 to 5 things that I include in my newsletter. And I use this and I've seen a dramatic shift in my click-through rate since I have. Most of your subscribers, by the way, will also be using Gmail. And Gmail, I don't know, for those of you who have the Gmail app on your phone, right, or you read your email on your phone, it will cut off messages that are too long. And this is why I generally recommend you steer away from just the wall of text emails, right? Because at some point that text is going to get cut off. But this also happens too if you have way too many clickables in your newsletter, right? If you have way too many of these, right? For example, I wouldn't recommend adding one of these into your newsletter for, like, let's say you're in some promos and swaps. That's low-hanging fruit. So let's use that as an example. Let's say you're in 2 promos and 2 swaps currently. I wouldn't add an individual one of these for all of those. I'd recommend you have a separate landing page where they live. And so you can just have one. And then promos and swaps aren't taking over your newsletter. Likewise, if you have a lot of text at the top and then images at the bottom with all your call to actions at the bottom, if it's too long, it gets cut off by Gmail. Most of your subscribers are going to open the email, start to read it, get to that point, and they're not going to click the button to see the full message and continue reading and see the whole. Um, it's another filter they have to go through, right, in that funnel, and so it's going to reduce how many people actually make it to click the link at the end, right? You also want to consider their state of mind. They're on a mobile device. When did you send your email? Are they at lunch? Is it the middle of their workday? When are they looking at this notification? Because it's on a mobile device, it can happen like anytime. It could be in the middle of something. And so it's harder when somebody is distracted to get them to sit down and read, right? Than it is to present to them something like this, right? Where there's a little bit of text that's descriptive and an image that communicates this is the thing, right? So you want to consider that as well. They're going to be on a mobile device. That means they could be opening your emails anywhere, right? And at any time. And sometimes it's going to be fine. They're going to be interested in reading the full email, right? But a lot of times they're getting, like, as I'm doing this presentation, my phone is right here next to me and I'm getting I'm getting emails, as I'm sure you are all getting emails right now too, right? Uh, if you opened one of them, I'm sure you probably didn't read it in its entirety. I'm sure you were much more interested in what I had to say, right? That's what's happening to your readers when you email them too. They're in the middle of something, they're doing something else, your email shows up, right? What is it that you're trying to communicate to them? Maybe they open it and they see that first image, and maybe they can't do anything with it right now, but maybe they know they're going to come back to it because this communicated to them most effectively or more effectively than just a wall of text, right? Something to consider. Right. More graphic focused emails may perform better also because there's limited real estate on a mobile device. Most of the time, you're going to be crafting your newsletter on a computer and you're looking at it and it's going to be displayed to you how it's probably going to look like on a computer. You should always preview your emails if your mailing list service gives you the option to, which I think most of them do, in mobile. And MailerLite and MailChimp, I know, do this, allows you to see a mobile preview, what it looks like on a mobile device, because it will change. The size of your images, how they look, will be different on a smaller screen. This is something to consider and something for you to be aware of, because that email is going to be responsive to whatever platform they're on. And again, the majority of your subscribers are going to be opening your emails on a mobile device. If you've got long form content, again, I mentioned this, consider linking to that in an external source rather than having them read it in their email app on their phone. This is especially true if you have multiple things that you want them to do. Now, if you're writing a newsletter, that's talking more of a relationship building newsletter. You're just kind of talking generally about whatever's going on. And that's all that there is in your newsletter, you're probably fine. If you're not including a whole lot of calls to action that are going to point them somewhere else, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But you want to have a balance, right? If it's longer than, I'd say, 3 paragraphs, 3 short paragraphs, it might be better that it lives somewhere else and you can send them to it, right? And I say might because I know that there are authors out there who have that style of newsletter that's all text, and it works great for them. I'm sure it does, you know, uh, but it's something to consider, right? Something to consider. If we're talking about your click rate, if you're wanting people to click on something, much better to present it to them in this method, right, than a wall of text, right, with some links embedded into the text here and there, right? How often should you send your newsletter? This is another aspect of the effectiveness of your newsletter. Uh, Your open rates should inform this. If your open rates are a little low and you're sending less frequently, maybe you need to send more frequently. If you're sending very frequently and your open rates are low, maybe you're sending too frequently. But if your open rate is at that benchmark and you're sending at a certain frequency, then that's probably a good spot to be at. Maybe you could send a little more often, maybe a little less often. It depends. But you know, how often should you send? We get this question a lot. So how much do you have to say or offer them? We talked about this earlier. If you're cranking out new content all the time, then maybe you have a reason to email them twice a week. If you don't, that's fine. Maybe you don't need to email them as much. Subscribers should be getting value every time they open an email from you. So you shouldn't just be emailing them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday with the same thing over and over and over again, right? How much do you have to say to them? How much do you have to offer? Right? That should be the first thing you ask yourself. And if you're trying to answer that question of how often you should send, what is it that you have to say? What is it that you have to share? Ask your subscribers. We talked about surveys in one of our previous webinars. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I recommend you include a survey early on. This could be in your automation sequence, your welcome sequence. When they first sign up, just ask, hey, how often do you want to hear from me? Do you want to hear from me every week? Or do you want to hear from me like once a month? And I just send you a digest of everything that happened this month. Ask them. This is more going to preserve your subscriber count. It's going to probably prevent people from unsubscribing more than it's necessarily going to increase the effectiveness of your newsletter. But if somebody stays subscribed to your newsletter because they're only getting monthly emails from you, but you do still have more content to share that you want to share on a regular basis with your readers who don't mind getting emails from you every week, you can do a little bit of both, and you can accommodate what each of your subscribers is wanting to receive this way. So ask them. I think that's the number one thing that you can do is ask them. And if you see overwhelmingly like 90% of my subscribers, only want to hear from me once a month, well, then maybe that makes your job really easy, right? Maybe you can just do once a month and you'll be fine. But also, when it comes down to it, it's what's best for you. So research says that at least once a month and at most 2 times a week is the ideal range. And that's a big range. We're talking about a difference between like 1 and 8, there, give or take, emails per month. That's actually a big gap, right? Once a month is the least because if you're emailing them less than once a month, in all likelihood, they're going to forget who you are. They're not going to know why you're emailing them and who is this person in my inbox and why did they write this book, right? All of that can be very confusing. And so at least once a month, that's the bare minimum, right? In very few industries can you get away with anything else, right? It's usually once a month is the bare minimum. But more frequency is fine. Again, provided you have something to say, something you have to offer. One example of this. So our authors on BookFunnel do use BookFunnel promos and swaps. And one concern that authors do have is how do I balance the content in my newsletter? I have all the stuff I want to say about my stuff, but then I have these swaps and promos that I'm doing. And while it's great and my readers appreciate it, it's something I have to do for those promos and swaps, but it's not necessarily directly helping me immediately in the immediate, right? Right. In the long run, it does, but in the immediate, I'm really just sending them to go download somebody else's book. How do I balance that out? One thing I'd recommend you do if you're going to be sending twice a week, have one of your emails where your content is the predominant thing, and then the second email the promos can be a little bit more prominent, and you alternate them. So the promos are at the bottom of that first email, and then they're at the top of the second email. And there's some different things mixed in there too. That's one example. The people that are looking for promos, if you share them on a specific day, I share them on Fridays with my newsletter, for example. My subscribers know every Friday is Free Books Friday, and I send them links to promos and swaps and whatnot, and they can find them there. But I do include the links to them in the bottom of the other emails that I send. So they're there for the people that are looking for those, right? All of that to say, right? You have a range in there. What works best for you? How much do you have to say? How much content do you have to offer? But also, what can you be consistent with? Can you write and send and produce one email a week? Can you fit that into your schedule? Like logistically, can you fit that into your schedule? I don't want you to feel, excuse me, and I'm not trying to pressure anybody into sending 2 emails a week to their newsletter. That would drive some people crazy. And I'm sure you have a busy schedule and you might not be able to fit that in with everything you have going on top of, the writing you have to do and revisions and managing ARC teams and all that stuff, all those other things you have to do. What can you fit in realistically? I think that is probably more important than some of the other points. Right? Are you able to crank out a newsletter twice a week? Go for it. If you can do it and you can provide new content in each newsletter, I'd say go for it. Give it a shot. Right? But if that's hard for you to be consistent with, dial it back. Go to once a week or once every other week or just once a month, and that's fine. Understand, though, that the less frequently you're sending, the more on point everything is going to have to be, right? Because they're going to have to remember you. And things like your subject line are really going to matter a little bit more when you're sending with that frequency. So, questions. I'm sure we have some in the chat. We'll go through whatever questions we have and additional questions. So feel free to continue putting them in the Zoom chat. We will get to those here as well. Emma and Kelly, what do the folks want to know? I see there's some questions there in the chat. I haven't looked at them yet.
Okay, Deborah just asked a question that I think is pertinent about frequency of sending the same promo. Like, how do you kind of gauge if you need to add the same promo, just 1 send, 2 sends?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So if you are participating in if you're participating in fewer than 5 promos a month, you hopefully should be able to share them once and get the clicks you need. And then next week, probably you're sharing the next one. You probably would want to be doing a weekly sending frequency at that point. The more promos you're in order to maintain the clicks that you need to maintain a reputation score, you do have to send a little bit more frequently. So if you share your newsletter monthly, I would say you probably wouldn't want to do more than 1 to 2 promos per month or 1 to 2 swaps per month. Keep it simple. Swaps, you could maybe do 2 to 3. But you only have one shot. You have one email that you're sending that month to get the clicks that you need for your reputation, right? So if let's say you're doing 2 promos, I would send that first one twice, send the other one twice, however you want to do it, alternate or what have you. But this is where you might also want to consider having a promos landing page that you can link to instead. And I've shown this before. I might pull it up here in a little bit. But essentially what this would be is a landing page where you post all your promos and you update them. You keep them up to date there. You typically would do this through your mailing list service. You could do it that way, or any other landing page creator, right? BookFunnel doesn't have the option to do this. You have to create a landing page for your own books. So this would be this would be something else. But you would have a landing page where all your promos and swaps live, and you share a link to that landing page in your newsletter. Instead, you send them there, and then there they can click on however many promos you're sharing. So that is a way to more effectively share your promos and swaps in your newsletter. It streamlines your newsletter. You're only sharing one link, and that means you can include it more easily. You can just put it at the bottom of every email, for example, right? And it sends them over there, and then they can go and click on whatever they want to click on over there, right? People who don't want to see it can ignore it. And the behavior on that is going to be a little different too. Sometimes you get more consistent clicks, is what I would say. So you sometimes might get, like, you share one promo, and depending on what image you use, you get a lot of clicks for that one, and then the next one you share doesn't get many clicks. When you send them to a landing page and they're on a separate page where they can then kind of browse a little bit, you get more consistency in the clicks that you're getting. So that's what I would recommend if you're starting to do more than, more than 3 to 4 promos in a given month. At the end of the day, it always comes back, though, to the number of clicks you're getting. If you are getting 30 or more clicks on your newsletter promos, probably good in terms of the frequency you're sending them. If you have a reputation that you want to maintain, like maybe you have a high reputation score, and so you want to get more than that, and that's a number you're aiming for, that's totally fine. But 30 is what I suggest as the benchmark for a newsletter promo, and about 20 for a sales promo. If you're getting about that many clicks, you should be okay, right? So look at it from that end too. If you're sharing your promos and they're not getting very many clicks, there might be some way to optimize how you're sharing them. There might be a way to, maybe you do need to share them more frequently, right? If you only get a few clicks on the promos you're sharing and you don't want to change how you're sharing them, and you're not getting enough clicks to hit that 30 mark, then maybe reduce the number of promos that you're doing, right? So the number of clicks you're getting should also inform how frequently you share them. But when you put them on a landing page, this goes for swaps too. When you put them on a separate landing page, you can just keep them there. And then you can share a link to that, once a week at the bottom of your newsletter, or more frequently or less frequently, whatever it happens to be. And that'll just send them over there where they can click at their leisure, right? Rather than going from their email app, typically on their phone, to then an external link and bouncing back to go click it again. And that's a little more frustrating. So that's what I recommend if you're doing more than that. Otherwise, if you're doing a small number, I would send until you hit that minimum benchmark, 20 for a sales promo, 30 for a newsletter promo. And if you're hitting those pretty easily, then maybe you can add more promos into your rotation that month or the next month, right? Hopefully that answers. I know that was a little long-winded, right? As I tend to be. But
okay. Well, Vash is asking, and they admit that some of this might have been answered, but what BookFunnel features do you find the most helpful in either building and/or enhancing the quality of your newsletter? Which promos do you think are more effective for helping with subscriber happiness, for example? Or is there an underused BookFunnel feature you wish more authors were aware of as we create and improve our newsletters?
it's a good question.
Yeah.
So the low-hanging fruit, promos and swaps, free books are always going to get more clicks. So if you're talking about like subscriber happiness, subscribers like free books. They're going to like to click on a promo that has free books in it, or a swap that's for a free book, more so than a sales promo or something like that. Sales swaps can be a little bit of an easier sell because you're just, it's one book, and you can maybe give some more dedicated space to it in your newsletter, maybe even a short paragraph about, talking about the book. And I've seen some authors do really good exclusives too, where, and now keep in mind, an exclusive is going to be, like it says, if you're doing an exclusive swap with somebody, when you share their book, you are only sharing your book in their book in that email. I've seen some authors do a really nice job of presenting another author's book in a way that's engaging. I had an author do it for me, and it was like, holy cow, That was it was very impressive how they did it. They had a good subject line. I think it was something like "Let's crack open this book" or something like that, and or it was catchy, and they presented it. Basically, they pretty much previewed my book and read the description, so there was some time they had to put into it. They were thoughtful about it. So if you're willing to be thoughtful about some of those things, that can work as well. But really, what I think is probably underutilized, bundle pages. If you have a bundle page that has all your bonus content, for example, it's very easy to share bonus content. You're pointing them to essentially like your own promo, right? Where they can go and claim some free books. That I think is underutilized, bundle pages, rather than, think about it. If you have some new bonus content, we're going to be talking about reader magnets. Is it next week? I think talking about reader magnets. So that's like in the realm of bonus content, but maybe you have like bonus chapters and other stuff too, right? How do you know that some of your readers haven't like missed some of that stuff? If you're pointing them to a bundle page, they can find all of it rather than pointing them to like a new piece of bonus content by itself. Bundle pages are incredibly useful. Otherwise, you can use individual landing pages, and then that works out fine. But if we're talking about like features on BookFunnel that are maybe underutilized, I would say bundle pages would be at the top of my list. I think authors you should have a bundle. If you have a series, that series should have a bundle page. If you have bonus content, it should have its own bundle page. Maybe you have one that's kind of a blend of the two, so they can find some bonus content along with the books that they can purchase and buy and that sort of thing. I would say bundle pages are probably at the top of my list for the most underutilized BookFunnel feature that you could incorporate into a newsletter. Because of course there's things like print codes, but that's not really good. It's not really good to fit into a newsletter. Doesn't really jive. Right, but that's what I would say.
Okay.
And I think Vosh followed up when you say a series page, is that a sales page? Like if you're wide? So it could be. So on your own bundle page, I tell you what, folks. Let me show you. let me show you here. Do I have that? Oh, I do. I have it ready to go. Here. This is my own bundle page for my series. And so these are the main books in my series. This is the reader magnet. And so I link to this from like all over the place. I send people here from other places too. And you can update this. So if you have a new reader magnet or something like that, you can put things at the top that are new. You wouldn't have to do it like this, like a series page. You could do other stuff too, right? I have one for my bonus content, for example. That's just I have 4. Well, I guess I have a sample, like an excerpt that's a reader magnet. So I have 5 reader magnets currently on a bundle page as well. And I link to that so that, people go there and they find it. And maybe they've downloaded one reader magnet, but they haven't done one of the others. Yes, I can drop that link. Let me grab that real quick. There we go. So, the bundle pages, I would say, especially in your newsletter, makes it really easy to just link them to a bunch of stuff, right? And readers respond to it very well. And keep in mind, once they're here, like they can click on this book, and this is the this is the reader magnet here, and so they could claim this one, and then they could come back without leaving the bundle page and buy book 1, right? And technically, my box set is 99 cents for a limited time, so all my pages say that right now. But but yeah, that's what I would say. Anyway, moving on. We have more questions. We have more
Actually,
questions.
no, I don't think we do.
There's a whole lot of chatting going on there in the chat without any.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I
hey.
was chatting with someone
Oh, Emma. Emma's
about
just getting away.
subscribing to, well, to the BookFunnel, the BookFunnel promos. Um,
Yeah, I'm
they were
pimping the
asked if there were
Oh.
spoilers.
I do see a question from Stephen that maybe got mixed. How long a subject line is too long in words or characters? Stephen, I recommend that you test this. I don't know specifically what the length is, and it might vary too if they're on a mobile device versus on a computer. So I would do a test and see, because like if I'm pulling up my Gmail app right now, it'll also be different. Like, are they looking at it in their app, or are they seeing the notification on their phone? Right. So you actually do have a fair bit to work with. Like I'm looking here, you've got probably like 4 or 5 words that you could easily fit in there. But you might do something like I have this is a subject line, an example from something totally, this is not from an author. The subject line is double drop colon content reference and then there's an ellipsis because it's getting cut off. And that actually is kind of because what's after the and? Like I'm wanting to know now what is after the and so I can go and see that. But so sometimes you want to go a little bit longer than that and hit that ellipsis because people are like, they want to click on it. But you could technically just add your own ellipsis to the end of a shorter phrase if you wanted to as well. But but yeah, so test it. That's what I would recommend is test. Send test emails to yourself, look at them on your computer, look at them on your phone and see how it looks. Primarily focus on Gmail. If you don't use Gmail as your primary email, open a Gmail account, right? Get the Gmail app on your phone and take a look at it. So yeah, another comment here. Kenya says that MailChimp does a good job of rating your email for you. It can rate your subject line too. Yes, that is a great tool. So your mailing list service may also have some built-in tools to help rate things. I don't know that MailerLite has that, but I'm sure you can probably find even just like a generic subject line rater out there. Maybe that's something. But yeah, there's plenty of other things that you can find. Rosie says, I've had 1 to 2 subscribers tell me somehow my newsletters are coming through with white on white, even though I've previewed, etc. This content sandwich would prevent this even more. So if it's coming through white on white, I'm guessing the text is white. It may be that the text color has been changed to white. And if you tell your mailing list service to change the text to a certain color, it will respect that color oftentimes, or can insert. And since it's a small number of subscribers, it might actually be their device that's respecting that color, meaning that you said the text was white. So, okay, the text is white and we're going to display it on a white background. Some devices are able to detect that and will change the text to black. Or if, for example, a dark mode, right? If their phone goes into dark mode, right, where the background will shift to black, their phone is able to change that. So I would look at the text in your email and see like, okay, is the text color set to a different color? And try changing it to black or a default responsive color instead, so that it could be that their phone is, or their device is respecting that color, and even though it's over a background of the same color, and it's not happening for everybody else because their phone is detecting it or something like that. It could also be a situation like that. If it's not a lot of your subscribers, I wouldn't be too worried though. It's probably their device more likely than anything, but it's still worth looking into. But yeah, the content sandwich. Yeah, if something goes wrong with the text or the image, like you have multiple things there that can get the point across, right?
Okay. Um, Jennifer is, Deborah, I am going to refer to Emma on whether or not we have the thriller or sci-fi on that page. I don't know if you saw that one, Emma.
What's this?
For the subscribers for the BookFunnel hosted promos.
Your BookFunnel promos have any thriller genres or sci-fi?
We happen to have a BookFunnel admin who posts fabulous sci-fi promos, so I defer to him, and he
Oh,
made
you're talking about
at
me.
time. So, and then for thriller, I lump those in. We lump those in with mystery and suspense. So, if there's ever
Okay.
a separate out the niches, there's requests.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. There was another question. It likes to jump on me. Sorry. Jennifer's asking, like the format and fonts of BookFunnel's newsletter, are those done in MailerLite? I have a free account and I'm having trouble finding those fonts to use.
Ah, well, that is actually ConvertKit. Is where those are done. We are BookFunnel's newsletter comes through ConvertKit. And I'd be interested to know if it's the recent ones that you really like, because I am responsible for designing those. So
Jack's like, is it good?
yeah, follow up, Jennifer. What was good about it? No, the fonts are I have to look them up. I don't know, but the ConvertKit is where we did that. There, you also use like a font identifier. There are some of those out there to identify fonts. That's kind of a useful thing. You can take a screenshot and upload it, and it will tell you what font it is.
Are they the same fonts we use in Canva for the BookFunnel?
On the images, maybe.
Check Canva. I think it's
There's also a question here. It got answered by Kelly, but I'll read it out loud. Can bundle pages host both freebies and sales links? Yes. They can. You can add any page type to a bundle page. You can add, so you could have simple download pages, email sign up pages, sales pages, and restricted pages all on the same bundle page. Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes, Jennifer said, yes, it was the recent ones. Very easy to read. I know that what the fonts are, but not in the MailerLite font list that I've seen. Yeah, they might not be there. And I don't know that MailerLite allows you to import fonts or not. I don't know that they do. So
they do. If you have, I think you may have to have
ah,
or maybe you can. But yeah, you can upload.
gotcha. Yeah. So alrighty. Oh, hey, we had another question. Ladies, if you want to, I don't want to do your job for you. Somebody can. Deborah has another question here.
I'm actually making a note on something, so
Okay, I'll read it then. So Deborah asked, how can I offer a new magnet to subscribers, but also to others who I want to get on my list? How do I structure it? Okay, good question. First of all, I wouldn't be afraid to use an email sign-up page and just send it to everybody. Right? It's not the end of the world. Most of your existing subscribers aren't going to squawk about it, generally speaking. It's not going to be a problem. And that way you can very simply share one link. And then if they share it with somebody, that person also gets, that. I will sometimes in my newsletter directly share a link to a simple download page. Occasionally, when I'm not pointing them to a bundle, I will just point them to a simple download page if they're in my newsletter, because, the more the merrier, right? You're already on my mailing list. If you're opening this email, chances are you're on my mailing list unless somebody forwarded it to you. So I'm not going to worry too much. And I'm just going to share a simple download page. So if you're sharing an email sign up page, so Deborah followed up, but then will the already subscribed end up with the same newsletters? I guess the question is, are you pointing? So here's most mailing list services are going to be able to detect somebody's already on this list. So if you have kind of a generic list that your reader magnets funnel into, most of your subscribers are going to be on that list. If somebody claims it and they're already on that list, it's not going to be a problem for that. I guess maybe if you could clarify your question a little bit more, will the already subscribed end up with the same newsletters? That depends on, I guess, the newsletters that you're sending. You have to rewrite new emails, perhaps an automation sequence, I guess might be the question. So yes, if you have an automation sequence going out when they subscribe or join a list, and most of the time you can make it so that that automation sequence only triggers once. I believe this is something you can do in MailerLite. So if they get re-added to that same list again, it doesn't trigger that automation sequence again. You wouldn't have to rewrite new emails. My automation sequence, I know the way I use it for my welcome sequence, I should say, is it includes links to all the magnets. And so they all get funneled into one welcome sequence anyway. So I have 5 magnets. They all funnel into the same thing, and then that actually points them to the bundle page. And so it doesn't matter which one they came from. They go through the same sequence, and it's just like, hey, you might have gotten this book, or maybe you didn't see this one, or maybe you didn't see that one. And there's some of that going on in there. So I would try to streamline it. But yeah, if you did want to have separate welcome sequences for each of your reader magnets, there's a little more to juggle there. There's definitely a little more to juggle if you're doing that. So that's why I would recommend having them kind of go through one experience. Obviously there's times where maybe you have separate series. Maybe that's not separate genres, and maybe you don't want those to mix. Kind of have to keep those things separate. I could see doing that, but like I have like those 5 reader magnets. They go through the same thing. If they claimed one of them, they can claim the others. And if they claim another one later on, they don't go through the welcome sequence again. They just go through it once.
Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.